Here we are starting our next session of The Guardian. We're so grateful to have Violetta with us, our presenter. Violetta is an artist and graphic designer living in Pointe-Noire in the Congo, and is a researcher, writer, and presenter in the field of Baha'i history. She is the co-creator with Adib Misumian of the Utterance Project, a website and YouTube channel dedicated to sharing the beauty of the utterances of the Bab, Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, in the original Arabic and Persian. She is the author of 4 illustrated chronologies on the lives of the central figures, namely the Primal Point for the Bab, the Blessed Beauty for Baha'u'llah, the Extraordinary Life of Abdul Baha, and the Guardian that we are embarking on once more today for Shoghi Effendi. Now, these 4 chronologies, they total over 2,000 pages and 4,000 illustrations, and they're available actually in their entirety right now. You can go there right now on the Utterance Project website. Violetta Zain has given over 100 talks on Baha'i history since 2021, and this includes 70 of those talks right here on Clearwater Baha'is, the YouTube channel, the Facebook page, and wherever we're trying to post these videos. We're very grateful again, Violetta, that you've been able to be with us for this time, and we hope that we can continue to have you much longer to really help connect people with Baha'i history as you have. And as the people have been commenting on YouTube and Facebook and so forth, how they've also been thankful, we are also grateful to you. And again, as this session starts, we welcome all of you who have joined us here once more through the sessions, and we look forward to going to conclusion. Welcome, Violetta.
Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you. Today is The Guardian, part 15. We've been together for 15 Sundays. And this part is going to cover 1 year in the life of the Guardian. It's going to cover the year 1951 to 1952. And the main subject of this is the institution of the Hands of the Cause. So this part covers the life of Shoghi Effendi from the age of 54 in 1951 to the age of 1955 in 1952. December 1951, Hands of the Cause, before 1951. So I'm going to go very quickly, and you can go on to the chronology to see the details of this, but I want to explain to you how Hands of the Cause sort of came to be. The station of the Hands of the Cause was instituted in the Kitabi Akdas by Baha'u'llah, where he talks about, in this holy cycle, the learned are on the one hand the hands of the cause, and on the other the teachers and diffusers of the teachings. And this is an eminent position, and Baha'u'llah appointed 4 living hands of the cause during his time. And so they were the first hands of the cause: Adib, Haji Akund, Ibn Azdak, and Ibn Abhar. Then, when the time came for Abdul Baha's ministry, Abdul Baha made a decision, although he could have appointed living hands of the cause, not to appoint living hands of the cause. Abdul Baha named hands of the cause posthumously. And people usually learned about this when he was giving his talks on Saturdays in 1915 in the middle of World War I, the talks that we now know published as the Memorials of the Faithful. So he would talk and he would say this hand of the cause and this hand of the cause. So from clues such as those, we have learned that Abdul Baha has named 4 hands of the cause posthumously after their passing: Muhammad Reza, Nabili Akbar, There is no photograph of the father of Ibn Astak, Mullah Sadiq Khorasani, and the father of Varha, Mirza Ali Muhammad Varha. Following the tradition of Abdul Baha to name posthumous hands of the cause, the Guardian also named 10 hands of the cause posthumously. John Ebenezer Eslamont, Haji Amin, Keith Ransom Keller, Martha Root, John Henry Hyde Dunn, Sayyid Mustafa Rumi, Abu Jalil Bey Sad in Egypt, Muhammad Taqi Isfahani, Louis Gregory, and I forgot on this graphic, Charles Wolcott. Roy Wilhelm. My apologies. I forgot on this graphic, Roy Wilhelm. So the first contingent of Hands of the Cause was appointed on the 23rd of December, 1951. And these were living Hands of the Cause. And the Guardian sent a cable to the world saying, the hour is now ripe to take long, inevitably deferred step in conformity with provisions of Abdul Baha's testament. If you remember from part 4, in his will and testament, Abdul Baha had said the Guardian of the Cause would name Hands of the Cause. Through appointment, first contingent, Hands of the Cause of God, 12 in number. So there were 12 in number in the first contingent on the 23rd of December, 1951. 3 in the Holy Land, William Sutherland Maxwell, Charles Mason Remy, and Amelia Collins. 3 in Asia, Waliullah Varha, Tarazullah Samandari, Ali Akbar Furutan. 3 in America, Horace Hotchkiss Holly, Dorothy Beecher Baker, Leroy Ioas, and 3 in Europe, George Townsend, Herman Grossman, and Ugo Giachery. These 10 men and 2 women, in this appointment of a contingent, all of a sudden, the entire appointed arm of Baha'i administration to administer the faith of Baha'u'llah was thrust into existence in one cable with 12 appointments. This was such an exciting time for the Baha'i world. There was a new institution, these Hands of the Cause. These Hands of the Cause would travel the world for the Guardian and later for the Universal House of Justice. They were appointed because of their character. This was a rank. This is the highest rank that anyone could attain during the ministries of Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, and Shoghi Effendi, and never, ever again. So we have 8 Hands of the Cause from the heroic age of the faith, and then we have the 10 Hands of the Cause appointed by Shoghi Effendi posthumously, some of which, like Haji Amin, had lived through the heroic age. And these were now servants of the Guardian in the formative age of the faith, representing this completely new institution. And each of these individuals, these 12 individuals, from one minute to the next, after they were appointed and they were informed by telephone and cable, their lives changed utterly. On the 29th of February, 1952, just 2 months later, Shoghi Effendi appoints the second contingent of Hands of the Cause. And in this second contingent, there were 7 Hands of the Cause. 2 in North America, Siegfried Stoppflusher, also known as Fred, Corinne True. There were 2 in Iran, Zikrullah Khadem and Shuaullah Alai. There was 1 in Germany, so Europe, Albert Muschlegel. There was 1 in Africa, Musa Banani, and there was 1 in Australia, Clara Dunn. This brought the number of Hands of the Cause to 12 plus 7, 19. 19 in the Baha'i faith is called a Vahid. That's the name, the Persian name for the number, for 19 a group of 19 months, 19 days, 19 years, 19 cycles of 19 Vahids of 19 years. It's the group of 19 is a Vahid. And from the moment of the 29th of February, 1980, then 1952, until the 4th of November, 1957, the Guardian would always keep the number of hands of the cause alive and working in the world at 19. When William Sutherland Maxwell passed away, the Guardian appointed his daughter, his wife, Ruhiya Khanum. When Waliullah Varha passed away, he appointed his son, Ali Muhammad Varha, who also inherited the role of trustee of Hukukullah from his father. When Fred Shopflusher passed away, Jalal Khadhih was elevated to the rank of Hand of the Cause. When Dorothy Baker died in a plane crash, Paul Haney became a Hand of the Cause. And when George Townsend passed away a few months before The Guardian, Agnes Alexander was appointed Hand of the Cause. So in this part, we're going to see several far-reaching changes in this period of 1 year. We've already seen one of them last week, the appointment of the first International Bahá'í Council. The second big event, of course, was the first contingent of Hands of the Cause. Between the first contingents of Hands of the Cause and the fourth event in this 1 year period, the second contingent of Hands of the Cause is an event we haven't talked about yet. And that is the enlargement of the International Bahá'í Council. And it is extremely, extremely important. I think I talk about that a little bit later because I have a couple of things to address before we get to the enlargement of the Bahá'í Council. January to March 1952, the land at Bahji. This is very important to set the tone because the second most important theme in this part is actually very exciting. It's the Guardian basically acting like a general and transforming Bahji in a period of just 4 days. So it's very exciting. But before we get to that, I have to explain the land at Bahji a little bit. But before I get to that, I want to take you through a day in the life of the Guardian. This is a very nice picture of the house where the Guardian lived, the house of the master. So what was a typical day like for the Guardian? We don't really know. But we do know of one day that Leroy Ioas witnessed and that he explained in a talk that he gave in Johannesburg, South Africa in 1978. And he said that the Guardian usually woke around 5:30 in the morning. And after his morning prayers and meditation, he turned his attention to piles and piles and piles and piles and piles of letters and cables and telegrams, which some were from the day before, some had arrived that morning. And as he went through his mail, it's a process that took hours every single day. Shoghi Effendi made notes on every letter, how it should be responded to, what should be mentioned in the response, etc. The Guardian opened every single letter. Why, you may ask? Well, because something confidential could be in that letter, and no one but the Guardian of the cause could lay eyes on something confidential. So he would open all of the mail himself. Sometimes he gave the letters to Ruhiya Khanum, who was his main English secretary, and sometimes he gave them to his Persian secretary, Dr. Lutfullah Hakim. One evening, he told Leroy Ioas, "Today, I received 700 pages of minutes and records from different parts of the world, and I had to read them all." 700 pages. That's 3 nice-sized books. That volume was probably unusual, but it's important to note that it happened in his life. Every afternoon, Shoghi Effendi went to the gardens of the Shrine of the Bab and met with the Eastern pilgrims and had tea with them. He walked with them in the gardens. He spoke to them. He answered their questions. Of course, before that, they would have gone into the shrines and prayed. And it was usually Shoghi Effendi who chanted the tablet of visitation in Arabic. And after that, he would drive back down the mountain from the Shrine of the Bab back to his home. And he would continue to deal with the voluminous correspondence that he received. When he had dinner with any pilgrim, if they came from Uganda or Australia, if they came from the United States or some small country in Central America, he would ask them, well, how is the faith developing in Canada? You know, how's it progressing? How many centers do you have? How many spiritual assemblies do you have? How many groups do you have? Invariably, the pilgrims would say, whoa, I do not know. But you know who knew? Shoghi Effendi. He carried around the statistics of the entire Baha'i world in his head. He could tell you how many centers, how many local assemblies, how many groups of Baha'is were in any given country. And he would tell people about what was happening in their country. Shoghi Effendi, apart from possibly very confidential matters, Shoghi Effendi did not hold secrets regarding the functioning of the faith from the pilgrims. He openly spoke with people at the table, and sometimes there were members of the International Bahá'í Council, sometimes hands of the cause residing in the Holy Land, sometimes pilgrims, but he would not hide things from the pilgrims. He would talk to them about absolutely anything. Like, let's say he was building, like a good example is when he was building the shrine, the superstructure to the shrine of the Bab, he would talk about his plans, he would lay them on a table, he would push away his dinner plate. But after dinner, and this was always heartbreaking for the pilgrims, was when Shoghi Effendi pushed his chair back, Shoghi Effendi didn't go to bed. Not for hours and hours and hours. He went back to his office and he did several more hours of work, and he would go to bed at midnight, but sometimes at 1, sometimes at 3. And so this was really a very incredible schedule. This story I call I Am Like a Drop. One day, Leroy Ioas was speaking to Shoghi Effendi, and he made a mistake. There's one thing that you couldn't do when you were talking to Shoghi Effendi, and that is mention Shoghi Effendi's name in the same sentence as Abdul Baha. Don't ever do that if you see The Guardian. The Guardian stopped Leroy Ioas in his tracks and said, don't ever do that. Don't ever mention my name in the same breath as you mention the master. The master was like an ocean. I am a drop. The master was like the sun. I am like an atom. So don't ever, ever mention my name in the same theme or same trend of thought as that of the master. There is a vast gulf between Abdul Baha and all the rest of creation and the Guardian. So now, as promised, the story of the land at Bahji. This is a map that I found in, this is Akka here on the bottom here, right? See the very distinctive peninsula. And this is Bahji at the top here. And this is a map from the time of the British administration in Palestine. From the very beginning of his ministry, Shoghi Effendi, he always worked on 100 fronts at once and always paid perfect attention to every single thing. He was just a master at multitasking the way that I don't think we will ever see the like of again. And one of the things that preoccupied him from the beginning of his ministry to the end was beautifying the lands around the shrines, around the shrine of the Bab, but even more so the shrine of Baha'u'llah, the holiest place on the face of the planet, the place towards which every single Baha'i turns at during obligatory prayer, and the place we go to rest our foreheads at the holy threshold of on pilgrimage. In the 1880s, Baha'u'llah, who was still a prisoner inside the prison city of Akka, he was in the countryside. He was in Mazra by then. Yeah, because he went to Mazra in 1877. So around in the 1880s, Baha'u'llah was still a prisoner, but he was sort of in the countryside. He directed Abdul Baha to buy properties near the Sea of Galilee. And one 35-acre piece of land was on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is this beautiful, beautiful shape. And there's the western shore, which has Tiberias here. And then the eastern shore, which has Ein Gev here. And this land, part of these land, there was 35 acres that was there. And that is just, that land was strategically located between Syria and the West Bank near Ein Gev. And the state of Israel was absolutely desperate to purchase these 35 acres. And they belonged to faithful Baha'is called the Zikrullah family. And this was colloquially known as the Zikrullah land. So I'm going to come back to that. But just remember, valuable property. Far from Bahji, but valuable property. So mid-February to the 29th of February, 1952, Musa and Samihih Banani, the parents of Violette Naqshbandi, pioneers to Uganda. And this is a picture, it's an old postcard of Nakasero, Uganda. So they come back on pilgrimage. And Shoghi Effendi was just absolutely delighted to see them because the teaching work was going so incredibly well in Africa. And it was just such a joyful pilgrimage because the Guardian was so happy the entire time. And he gave the Bananis instructions for the development and the growth of the faith in Africa. And it was around the same time that in Kampala, there was a meeting being held with African seekers. And Shoghi Effendi and Musa Banani prayed together at the shrines for the progress of the faith in Africa. Then, of course, during his pilgrimage, like the last day of his pilgrimage, the Guardian told Musa Banani, you are a hand of the cause. And I don't know how many of you know this, but Musa Banani was illiterate. So he protested with his characteristic humility. And he said, I'm not worthy. I cannot read or write. My tongue is not eloquent. Give this mantle to Ali Naqshbandi, who is doing the lion's share of the teaching in Africa. And Shoghi Effendi replied, it is your arising that has conquered the continent. Ali's turn will come. And will it ever? He would be elected onto the first Universal House of Justice. So touching. From the 24th of February, 1897 to March 1952, we have another pilgrimage, the pilgrimage of Colonel Jalal Khadhih. Such a wonderful man, such an imposing presence, such a kind man. He was a colonel. He was a colonel. And he retired at the age of 46 in 1943, and he was elected onto the National Spiritual Assembly of Iran. And then he went on pilgrimage, and then his life changed forever. Jalal Khadhih, hand of the cause Jalal Khadhih, often described himself as a new creation after his 1952 pilgrimage in the presence of the beloved Guardian. Entering into Shoghi Effendi's presence and learning from him for the duration of his pilgrimage was just a before and after moment for him. When he was on pilgrimage, the Guardian himself took the pilgrims to the shrine of the Bab, the Eastern pilgrims. And when Jalal Khadhih finally came out of the shrine, the Guardian was standing there, looked at him and told him, all of the messengers of God, all the prophets of old are circumambulating this sacred spot, speaking of the shrine of the Bab. Jalal Khadhih started thinking, well, it's all the messengers of the past and the prophets of God and all those holy souls are circumambulating here, then what's happening in Bahji? At the moment that thought entered his head, the Guardian turned around, looked at him straight in the eye and said, and all of the messengers of God, all of the prophets of old, and the soul of the Bab in turn are circumambulating the shrine of Baha'u'llah. I have another pilgrimage story for you. I'm going to abbreviate this a little bit because it's very, very long. This is our beloved Ugo Giachery. Please come next week. We're going to be talking about the superstructure of the Shrine of the Bab. And The Guardian and Ugo Giachery and Leroy Ioas and all of these people from the Netherlands and Italy and Germany and Palestine, everybody collaborating together. Well, it's Israel now, I should say. Ugo Giachery is here, and this is the first Baha'i institution in Italy, the Local Spiritual Assembly of Rome in 1948. I'm going to not cut off his head. So the first time that Ugo Giachery ever met Shoghi Effendi was when he arrived on pilgrimage on the 4th of March, 1952, 2 months after having been appointed a hand of the cause. And Shoghi Effendi was very happy to meet Ugo Giachery. Ugo Giachery, you have to know, was a man of absolute competency, an amazing, amazing collaborator. And he would be just, the Guardian would mold him into the perfect instrument, and he would single-handedly do things that are kind of impossible to believe in a post-war Italy to secure materials to build the Shrine of the Bab. I mean, it's just, it was going to be so much fun next week. I mean, this week also is a lot of fun. Sorry. During his pilgrimage, Ugo Giachery discovered something very interesting about Shoghi Effendi, his favorite scent and his favorite flower. This here is jasmine. That's the Guardian's favorite scent. And this is lily of the valley. This is the Guardian's favorite flower. So it was one night in early spring. We're not really sure when, if it was during his first pilgrimage or after, when he was visiting the Holy Land, but Ugo Giachery had the privilege to stay overnight in the mansion of Bahji. And there was a little garden there that was like a little corner of paradise, and it had been kind of neglected, but you could smell all the loveliness coming from that garden. There was an exquisite scent of orange blossoms and the earthy smell of geraniums and sweet roses and several varieties of jasmine. So when Ugo Giachery entered the garden, he was just almost overtaken by all these different heavenly fragrances. He described them as a nectar. And before leaving Bahji that day, he gathered some jasmine blossoms, put them in a small vase, and put them in the front of the Guardian's seat at the dinner table. And the Guardian didn't speak. He was not only pleased, but he was really moved. He was deeply moved. And he searched Ugo Giachery's eyes with his luminous gaze, then smiled, raised the jasmine bouquet to his nose, and inhaled the heavenly scent with visible delight. Ugo Giachery later learned that jasmine was the Guardian's favorite scent. Interestingly, lilies of the valley were his favorite flowers, those beautiful, tiny little white bell-shaped wildflowers. During Ugo Giachery's pilgrimage, Baha'u'llah talked to him about the monumental shrine of Baha'u'llah. I decided to put a monumental Taj Mahal as an illustration. He talked to him very, very precisely about the fact that Abdul Baha had envisioned a double series of like almost 100 columns, 95 columns with exquisite Doric capitals like around the shrine, and that it would be a superstructure. The original shrine built by Abdul Baha would remain untouched, but the superstructure would be of untold magnificence, and it would be erected in future decades. And the columns would be 7 meters high, said the Guardian. So he asked Ugo Giachery to secure an architectural plan based on the details that he gave him. Before the Guardian obtained the land for Bahji, he had a very clear vision of what it would be like. They wanted to get 50 acres. And he wanted to have an avenue 100 meters long, all smooth paths converging, building a semicircular double colonnade with columns of all white marble. So the Guardian's idea was, this is sort of how the Guardian thought that the idea came it started, and I talk about that at the end. It's just like, first there's the dawn of the idea, and then there's the glimmerings, and then the idea comes fully formed. And so at this stage, the Guardian's idea for Bahji was sort of still in progress. The Guardian wanted Ugo Giachery to know about covenant breakers. He said that sometimes their attacks were like they made him so physically ill, it was as if 1,000 scorpions had bitten him. And he told him, you must know these things. I want you to know these things. So he took him into his confidence. And now we come to the enlargement of the International Bahá'í Council from the 8th to the 25th of March, 1952. So the first International Bahá'í Council was appointed in 1951 with Ria Khanum, Charles Mason Remy, Amelia Collins, Ugo Giachery, Leroy Ioas, Jesse Ravel, Ethel Ravel, and Lutfullah Hakim, who would later be elected onto the Universal House of Justice. But the three members were added in this second nomination. Or was it enlarged later? I have to see. Before we keep talking about Leroy Ioas, I have to introduce you to a book that really was my constant companion when writing this chronology, and that is Leroy Ioas, Hand of the Cause, written by his daughter, Anita Ioas Chapman. Her name is below here. Anita Ioas Chapman's biography of her father is just absolutely brilliant work filled with so many intimate snapshots of the beloved guardian, but it's also extremely well written. It's beautifully written. It's an absolute pleasure to read. And Leroy Ioas was also, like Ugo Giachery, the right-hand man of Shoghi Effendi for the last 5 years of his life. Shoghi Effendi called Leroy Ioas my Hercules. He was a very strong man. He was a very tall man, but he was also, just like Ugo Giachery, a man of immense capacity and a collaborator of the Guardian who was selfless and just absolutely had the capacity for very hard work in a sustained period of time. And that's extremely rare. It's interesting to hear a description of Shoghi Effendi physically from a Hand of the Cause and a Western Hand of the Cause, because the kinds of things they focus on are very different than Persians. And so he actually paints a portrait of the Guardian, like of his every feature and his hands and everything. He said that his features were extremely refined, that his nose was refined, his eyes, and he had delicate, small hands. And Leroy Ioas realized that the majesty and greatness of the Guardian, his imposing stature for Baha'is across oceans, was not his physical size, which was rather on the small side, but was the power of the spirit that flowed through him. And he was a channel used by God. He didn't need to be 6 feet tall. He didn't need to be 2 meters tall. He needed to be the Guardian. Leroy Ioas also said that when the Guardian spoke about the power of the cause, it seemed that the building shook from the power of the Guardian's words. And in the 5 years that he served him, Leroy Ioas never seemed to marvel at the way God used the Guardian to do his work on earth. In fact, Shoghi Effendi was smaller than Abdul Baha, closer in his physical stature to Baha'u'llah, his great-grandfather. All three of them, Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, and Shoghi Effendi, were small in size. Shoghi Effendi had some of the same facial features as Abdul Baha, but he had the hands of Baha'u'llah and the eyes of the Bab. And though the Guardian was always quite serious, he wasn't always serious. He did have a twinkle in his eye and a delightful sense of humor. So now the end of Ugo Giachery's pilgrimage, 25th of March to July 1952. This is an interesting story because at dinner one night, the Guardian said that when Ugo Giachery entered the dining room that night, Shoghi Effendi was already seated at the table, and his face was shining with this joy that he couldn't control and he couldn't conceal. And at the side of the Guardian, there was a small bundle, an object that was wrapped in colorful silk. handkerchief. This is a very common tradition for Persians. They often give a gift within a gift. So if they give you a book, they'll wrap it with a gorgeous scarf. And so you get two gifts in one. You get the wrapping, the scarf, and you get the gift. So this is what was in front of the Guardian. Obviously, it was Persian, and it had just arrived with a pilgrim that day from Tehran. And he had brought with him one of the most precious items ever to be placed in the archives. It was a copy, and this is not it, by the way, this is another handwritten copy of the Kitab-i-Ikan. It was a copy of the Kitab-i-Ikan in the handwriting of Abdul Baha that he had taken with him from Iran and given to the Guardian as a gift, which the Guardian would put in the International Bahá'í Archives. If also from the letters, the tablets revealed by the Bab to the Letters of the Living were found in Abdul Baha's affairs after his passing. So these also went into the International Bahá'í Archives. April to December 1952, Bahá'í endowments in the Holy Land. But first, of course, covenant breakers. Nair Afnan was the son of one of Abdul Baha's greatest enemies, and he had married Shoghi Effendi's eldest sister. He died in 1952. And the Guardian wrote a cable in which he names dozens of individuals who were covenant breakers. He was a particularly nasty brand of covenant breakers. And when he finally died, the Guardian had to write a letter saying, inform national assemblies that God's avenging wrath, having afflicted in rapid succession during recent years, two sons, brother and sister-in-law of archbreaker of Baha'u'llah's covenant, has now struck down second son of Sayyid Ali, Nair Afnan, pivot of machinations and the connecting link between old and new covenant breakers. It's really important to keep in mind that these covenant breakers are going to keep making the Guardian suffer throughout his ministry until the end. I mean, there's so much information, I don't feel like going into details. It's just suffices to say that every time one of them died, it was just another victory for the faith, in the sense that they had accomplished nothing. And a spiritual perspective on covenant breaker is given to us by Adib Taherzadeh, author of The Covenant of Baha'u'llah, a very difficult book to read, but a really important one to really understand the powers that radiate from and circle the center of the covenant. And Adib Taherzadeh said that covenant breaking was a cleansing process by which the impurities are thrown out of the body of the cause. In late May 1852, the Guardian approved the design by Charles Mason Remy of the temple on Mount Carmel. So this was it. 1, 2, 3 rows of sort of minarets, and then a dome. You know, Shoghi Effendi loved domes, so it had a dome, and it was made in Rome by a model maker by wood, and it was taken to Chicago by Amatul Baha at the All-American Teaching Conference in 1953, and later this model made out of wood was placed at Bahji. So we're going to slowly arrive at Shoghi Effendi getting the land for Bahji, and it starts with Leroy, Ioas, and the case of the covenant breakers. He goes to court with the covenant breakers. The Guardian had this court case over Bahji, and he tried to appeal to the government to lift the case out of civil court. And to this end, the Guardian rallied his helpers. He asked Ugo Giachery to come from Rome. Leroy, Ioas was already in Haifa. He had just arrived in March. And Larry Houts, an insurance salesman, stayed for several months, 3 months, to assist with this process. And they were able to assist the Guardian in a very difficult situation, which was causing him a great amount of pain. And they were able to really lift some of that burden for the beloved Guardian. No one really understood what the covenant breakers wanted out of this lawsuit. They didn't understand if they wanted co-custodianship of the Shrine of Baha'u'llah with the Guardian, or they wanted to secure their rooms in the mansion of Bahji. They wanted the mansion of Bahji back now, of course, because the Guardian had restored it in 1931. So they wanted it back. Of course, it was a ruin when they were lived in it for 37 years. They did nothing to it. Then the Guardian completely renovated it. It was absolutely beautiful and palatial, like during the time of Baha'u'llah, and now they wanted it back. So at first, Leroy Ioas found it really difficult to even look at the covenant breakers, but the Guardian gave him strict instructions never to lower his eyes when he was dealing with them. So the Guardian appealed to the Attorney General. And this man here is the Attorney General of Israel, Haim Cohn. 3 hands of the cause called on Attorney General Haim Cohn, who was also the Vice Minister of Religion. And the Vice Minister of Religion and officials of the foreign government. The Guardian continued to apply pressure through the hands of the cause, directly to both the Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the appeals of the Guardian had an immediate effect. David Ben-Gurion's legal advisor summoned the Vice Minister of Religions, the covenant breakers' lawyer, the lawyer for the hands of the cause, and their clients. The Baha'is refused to be in the same room as the covenant breakers, so they waited in another room. And the covenant breakers reiterated their claims, which were passed along, and the hands of the cause rejected each and every one of the claims of the hands of the cause. In the end, the Prime Minister told the covenant breakers that if they were free to continue their appeal, but they were now fighting with the state of Israel. And that was the moment when the covenant breakers dropped the case. And the Israeli government issued the authorization to demolish the ruins at Bahji. This large building of ruins, I think it was 2 stories, that was really ugly, and it was like against the mansion of Bahji. So on the 11th of June, 1952, the Guardian shared his legal victory over the covenant breakers. And as was his lifelong habit, as soon as he received the authorization, he began laying out the grounds at Bahji. So there were 2 different buildings to be demolished. The long building wouldn't be demolished until after the Guardian's passing. And there was a smaller building that was in between, that was between the mansion and the Shrine of Baha'u'llah that was demolished. And as soon as the Guardian arrived in Bahji, he began landscaping the approaches to the Shrine of Baha'u'llah with 8 truckloads of plants and garden ornaments. And Leroy stayed over in the mansion to oversee the work. The Guardian demolished the small building that was between the mansion of Bahji and the Shrine of Baha'u'llah. And from the roof, he had a very good view of what was going on. So there was a large amount of leveling the ground, making it all nice and level so things could be planted and it could be landscaped and there could actually be grass put in. And he put out lawns, rolled out lawns, put out flower beds, his beloved red crushed tile paths, the ones that he'd fallen in love with 30 years before in Torquay and in south of England. He put in iron gates, steps, and stone ornaments, topsoil, planted grass seeds, and by the end of the 4th day, there were lanes, hedges, crushed tile paths, there were lawns, there were flower beds, plants, trees, lampposts, pedestals, and stone ornaments, and a beautiful gate. It was really powerful experience for everyone to see the Guardian work so fast. Ugo Giachery was particularly impressed, and he would never stop being impressed. October 1952, the need for a new edifice for the International Bahá'í Archives. Shoghi Effendi had been collecting precious relics from the heroic age of the faith for 30 years. And the current archives were 3 rooms in the back of the shrine of the Bab. But Shoghi Effendi had collected so much that a new building needed to be built. Because, for example, these are some of the relics of Baha'u'llah. We have Revelation writing, we have some of his coats, we have his bowl from Kurdistan, a shawl, we have his seals, his taj, locks of his hair. From the Bab, we have a cup, we have a ring, we have a haikal that he himself calligraphied. This, my friends, is a work of art by a manifestation of God. We have in the green of a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, the coat of a Sayyid, his Quran, which is beautiful inlaid Persian work. We have a little, I think it's money pouch. Is that a money pouch? We also have his handwriting from his school years, his prayer beads, his samovar, and the basin, and a taj. And this is the marriage certificate for him and Khadija Begum. The Guardian also collected relics of Abdul Baha. Some of his shoes, and illuminated tablets in his handwriting, and some of his personal objects with, again, shoes here and a cap, a little skull cap. Then, of course, there were some other belongings, such as some of the belongings of the Greatest Holy Leaf. And so the perfect place for the International Bahá'í Archives, the Guardian decided, was on this part of Mount Carmel. This photograph is dated from later. It's maybe 10 years after. But you see an arc here, and the arc all descends down to where Bahji Khanum is buried. And so the International Archives would be the first building on the Ark, the first institution to be built on the Ark, which now has the Center for the Study of the Texts, the seat of the Universal House of Justice, and the seat of the International Teaching Center. So that would become now a new path for which the Guardian would allocate a great deal of time and energy in refining the design until it was perfect. But before he started working on the International Archives, something happened that affected the life of the State of Israel. And that was on the 10th of November, 1952, Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, passed away. And if you go to the chronology, you can watch this 37-second newsreel. This is a photograph of the funeral ceremony of President Chaim Weizmann, which the Guardian attended in person. And the most important thing that happened for Baha'is at that funeral was that for the very first time in history, Israeli news reported His Eminence Shoghi Effendi Rabbani, world head of the Baha'i faith. This is something that the Guardian had been seeking to obtain for almost 3 decades, which is official and public recognition of his station as world head of the Baha'i faith by the State of Israel. This is one of my favorite stories because it's a story on the 10th of November, 1952, Corinne True and Abdul Baha's wallet. This is a story that will just make you fall in love with the Guardian and his kindness. When Corinne True arrived on the 10th of November, 1952, at the age of 91 on pilgrimage, he welcomed her by saying, "You've come back to your real home." Corinne True did not know what was about to happen. It would be the most unforgettable moment in her life. Shoghi Effendi was very exultant at dinner. His eyes were twinkling. Remember I told you his eyes twinkled? His eyes were twinkling. The way they were when he's about to tease someone. So he tells Mrs. True, I understand, Mrs. True, you had something to do with the temple in the United States. Didn't you have something to do with the money? But of course, everyone knew that. So of course, Corinne True is very confused because that's what she was famous for, having had the purse strings for the building of the temple. So, everybody called her the mother of the temple. So she answered, yes, I received the money and I was the financial secretary. So Shoghi Effendi pulls out a wallet and he gives it to Corinne True and he says, this is a billfold which Abdul Baha carried with him when he was in America. And I know you will treasure it, knowing that it comes from him. Oh, Corinne True by this point was overwhelmed. She was so close to Abdul Baha. She adored him so much. She got a relic of Abdul Baha from the hand of the guardian. She was so moved. And then the guardian gently said to her, well, won't you open it and see what's in it? Well, what could possibly be better than a wallet of Abdul Baha while he was visiting America? Corinne True was fumbling with the wallet, so Shoghi Effendi told her, let me open it for you. So she opened it for her, and she looked inside, and she told Shoghi Effendi, it's a gold piece. Shoghi Effendi said, yeah, now take it out and look at it. Corinne True took out the gold coin and looked at it, and the guardian said, what's the date on it, Mrs. True? Corinne True looked at the date on the coin and said 1907. This is a 1907 gold coin, and I was given permission to use this by, oh no, actually by nobody. Wikipedia Commons. I never got any permission to use any other image, so Wikipedia had one. The Guardian said 1907, the date on this coin. That's the date of your first visit to the Holy Land to visit Abdul Baha. And this was a gold coin which Abdul Baha had. Just think of the amount of thought and love and kindness and tenderness that went into putting that gift together. The billfold that Abdul Baha had carried with him in America, when he saw Corinne True, when he placed the foundation stone for the temple on the 1st of May, 1912, and a gold coin from 1907 that had belonged to Abdul Baha, that was the same date as the first year that Corinne True came on pilgrimage in 1907. And how the Guardian had to read 700 pages of minutes, and he still found time to do this. November 1952, the development of the gardens at Bahji. On the 11th of November 1952, Shoghi Effendi told everyone, tomorrow morning we shall all go to Bahji. The day that they were going to Bahji was the day that the Baidun land was given to the Baha'is. So remember the 35 acres on the west coast of the Sea of Galilee that belonged to the Zikrullah family. The government of Israel had agreed to swap properties. The Baidun land was 40 acres in Bahji, and they had been kind of abandoned by the family. And the 35 acres around the Sea of Galilee were just exchanged. So the Baha'is gave the 35 acres to the state of Israel, and the state of Israel gave them the 40 acres in Bahji, and that is why everybody had to go to Bahji the next day. And at 2 p.m., the Guardian began walking around Bahji and planning the work. This is one of two candid photographs we have of Shoghi Effendi walking at Bahji. We do not know when they were taken. I do not know when they were taken. It's just him walking with his fez and his sort of rust-colored coat, his hands behind his back, walking and surveying the land, which is what he's going to be doing in the rest of this story. When the Guardian arrived in Bahji, every able-bodied Baha'i And every local worker was there. He had said everyone must come to Bahji, so everyone was there, Baha'is, non-Baha'is. And Shoghi Effendi rented a bulldozer to level the wild part of the property, a quarter of a huge circle that would eventually surround the shrine, but he was going to do a quarter of the circle in the next 4 days. Anxious to get a perspective on the entire grounds, the Guardian climbed up a ruined one-room building at the edge of the site, and the height made such a difference that he had the building repaired, added a wooden staircase leading to the roof, and furnished the interior to use in an on-site office. With this completely new vantage point, Shoghi Effendi was inspired with a new perspective on the entire process. So this is the second picture I was telling you about that we have of Shoghi Effendi, and both of those were graciously given to me by the United States National Bahá'í Archives. And this is actually, you see the strings here. This is Shoghi Effendi's method for doing paths. He would put strings on wood pickets, and the ground isn't leveled yet, you know? So he's walking and he's in the middle of working, and this is that path, actually. See that path to the side there. So, sorry. This is not a picture from Bahji. This is a picture from leveling the ground in Kampala, Uganda, but just wanted to show you a little bit what leveling the ground looks like. Once all the paths for the quarter circle had been done with string, then once they leveled the ground, they were able to trace the paths basically, and they worked very, very fast. Every single man present had a job. Ugo Giachery's job was to help Shoghi Effendi trace the paths and the star-shaped flower beds. And he was so entranced with the Guardian's speed of decision-making, his confidence, and his resolution in giving life to the vision he had in his mind, that he just had no eyes for anyone else but the Guardian the entire time the project lasted. The Guardian was creating beauty in 100 different places at once. And it was like he was projecting exactly what was in his mind exactly onto the ground, with the flowers and the shapes and the stars and the paths and the crushed and this and that. I mean, everything. It was like seeing something appeared as an idea and immediately be done, immediately appear into the realm of existence, basically, from an idea to existence, with like all these people working for him, doing it, and he was taking care of all the work on all the fronts. And this is the ruined building that he had the staircase fixed. It's still on the grounds, and he would be on the that height made a huge difference. He was able to see all of his plans unfolding. Oh, and see, this is the third photograph of Shoghi Effendi at Bahji. All of these I think were taken by pilgrims, like quickly snapped, because they're all a little bit out of focus. Shoghi Effendi moved very quickly between the workers. He was directing, advising, counseling, cautioning, encouraging, explaining, demonstrating how to do the impossible, how to make a garden appear out of sand in 4 days. One day, there was an afternoon drizzle, but Shoghi Effendi didn't leave the grounds. He waited 30 years for this. 30 years for the Baidoon land, 30 years for those 40 acres. And he was not going to let a little bit of rain chase him from his dream. The Guardian ordered markers removed, trees removed. Young trees were brought in and planted along the paths. The outer circular path was lined with trees on both sides to create in time a tree-bordered path for circumambulation. Shoghi Effendi had iron gates, steps, stone decorations, flowers, flowering plants, topsoil, and grass seeds brought in from Haifa, from Mount Carmel, from the Rizwan Garden, and from the master's house, and had everything installed and planted. This I have a particular affection for, is the story of Shoghi Effendi and those white Galilee pebbles. Everybody, if you go on pilgrimage, do not take a pebble. We can no longer replenish them. What we have is all we will ever have. So please don't take a souvenir. It was really important for Shoghi Effendi to pave the direct path leading to the entrance of the shrine of Baha'u'llah with the most befitting material. At first, Shoghi Effendi thought he would use Carrara marble, but it was very, very expensive. And the marble is actually not that solid of a stone. If it had been exposed to the sun of Israel, it would have been damaged rather quickly. So instead, Shoghi Effendi opted for a local material not found anywhere else on earth, small, perfectly round, perfectly smooth, perfectly white pebbles from the Sea of Galilee, which he had already used on the path between the second and third gates leading to the shrine of the Baba on Mount Carmel and at the house of Abdul. In November 1952, while he was busy embellishing the holy precincts called Harami Akdas, Shoghi Effendi asked the Baha'i farmers in Adasiye, those who were still left, to send him 100 sacks of the small, smooth pebbles, which were only found on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And on the 15th of November, 1952, 4 days later, the gardens at Bahji were complete. So basically, in 4 days, the Guardian did this pretty much in totality. Maybe there wasn't all of the grass, maybe all the flowers weren't there. Of course, the trees would have been much smaller, but he unfolded what looks like a living carpet out of what was basically sand by leveling the ground and bringing in soil and then planting it in 4 days. This is, of course, those of you who have had the bounty and honor of going to the Holy Land have seen this extraordinary, one-of-a-kind design for the door. And this is, of course, you won't be surprised to know this is Shoghi Effendi's design. I'm going to choose just one of these. So while I tell my little story about the door. The original entrance to the Shrine of Baha'u'llah, many, many, many decades old, was hard, sturdy wood that had metal hinges, but it was ugly. And also, it wasn't really functional. The doors were, there was double doors that were misaligned by several degrees, so the door looked kind of crooked, and the Guardian decided to replace it. So he gave Ugo Giachery a sketch of what he wanted, and Ugo Giachery went straight to Tuscany, in Pistoia, a city famous for its world-class skill and pure talent of its artisans. And he found a man, and do not forget this name. His name was Saiello Saielli. Saiello Saielli, a reliable carpenter and cabinet maker and renowned expert on wood. And this man would also do the door for the International Bahá'í Archives. Because of Acca's particular climate, very, very, very dry and very, very, very hot in the summer and very, very wet and very, very humid in the winter, the new door had to be built with layers of wood so that there was space in between the different layers of wood so that the door frame would compensate for the temperature variation and the humidity variation over the year without warping like the first door had, which is just a one solid piece of wood. The other thing is also Mr. Saielli took it upon himself to stringently select the absolute best well-seasoned oak with the finest grain, free of any blemishes or imperfections. And you can see that in this beautiful close-up. You can see how perfect the door is. 60 years, 70 years on. Before and during the door's construction, Ugo Giachery visited Mr. Saielli in Pistoia to consult on technical details. The decorative motifs, so these here, the finishing, the quality of the oak, the copper nails, here, the copper nails, and the bronze lock. Let's see where the bronze lock is. Maybe behind this. And the hinges. So we don't see the hinges in this photograph. But each of the 4 panels on each part of the door contained a 9-petal rosette. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 panels. And this is a 9-petal rosette that has turned up edges. And there are wooden half globes also. And all of these are gilded. To make sure the floral panels would be perfect, Mr. Sayeli had created them first from gypsum and clay in order for the carver, the wood carver, to have a perfect model to copy. So the door was installed and the Guardian just loved the door. The Guardian was overjoyed by the door's the intricacy but simplicity and its decorative beauty, and he sent a cable of appreciation. He was so happy with that door. Winter 1952-1953, the design of the International Bahá'í Archives. But first, I love this story. This is one of my favorite stories. Late 1952, Ugo Giachery's experience with the first map by the Guardian. So, late 1852, we are approaching the beginning of the 10-year crusade. And this is the Guardian's first map of the 10-year crusade. And the Guardian was just an artist when it came to map. He used color coding, he used lines, he used circles, he had legends, he had legends. I mean, it's just so beautiful. He'd been making maps for 40 years by this point. He made his first maps when he was 10, 11, 17 years old, making maps his entire life. This is not the map of somebody who just made his first map now. This is the map of someone who has decades of experiences in map making. And this map was intended to be displayed in all the 4 intercontinental conferences. So it was really kind of interesting is that Ugo Giachery had to go to Italy to get the map printed in color. And because Italy was such a Catholic country, a lot of printers were worried about printing something that wasn't Catholic in nature, of another religion. That's an interesting story about this map. The inspiration for the International Bahá'í Archives was, of course, the Parthenon. And when Leroy Ioas asked the Guardian why, the Guardian said, the Greek style is beautiful. It hath withstood the test of time and has remained beautiful for over 2,000 years. And just beautiful proportions, you know. In the winter of 1952, the Guardian made his final decision on the dimensions of the International Bahá'í Archives. And he asked Hand of the Cause Mason Remy, an architect trained in Paris, to produce preliminary drawings. Several months later, Leroy Ioas was in Paris. And he decided that he was going to measure the Church of La Madeleine in the 8th arrondissement in Paris, which is a neoclassical style and has lots of columns as well. And because the only measuring tools he had were his 2 feet, he just kind of obtained rough measurements. But the reason that he did this is because the archives would sooner or later be under his purview. And he wanted to be mentally prepared for the type of building and the size that Shoghi Effendi wanted to build. On the 29th of December, 1952, Ruhiyyih Khanum describes the Baha'i holy shrines on Israeli radio. And this is not a picture from then, but it is a picture of our absolutely beautiful Hand of the Cause. I think she was her Hand of the Cause at this point because her father had passed away, but we're going to be covering that next week. Doing an interview on the radio. On the 29th of December, 1952, she was interviewed in the English section of Israeli radio broadcast. She gave an interview on the Shrine of the Bab. The presenter opened and introduced the Baha'i faith, saying that it was the 4th religion in Israel. And Ruhiyyih Khanum explained the 4 successive exiles of Baha'u'llah and the overarching objective of the faith, which was the attainment of universal world peace. She listed Baha'i principles. She explained that Baha'is had holy places in Israel, and that was one of the reasons that many Baha'is traveled here, as well as to meet Shoghi Effendi. And then in the next part of the broadcast, Ruhiyyih Khanum and Leroy Ioas were interviewed in front of the gardens at the Shrine of the Bab. So in conclusion, Ruhiyyih Khanum spoke briefly about the Bab's life and his martyrdom, and that his remains were hidden from place to place for 59 years. And now, in 1953, the design of the International Bahá'í Archives. This was a design drawn by Charles Mason Remy. This beautiful quality version was provided by the United States National Bahá'í Archives for this chronology. And so the process of design was very interesting because Shoghi Effendi needed Mason Remy to design the building that was in his head. But Shoghi Effendi hadn't studied architecture. So what happened was that every night in the Western Pilgrim House, when the Guardian came to dinner, Mason Remy would bring his latest design and he would pin it to the garden door of the dining room. And Shoghi Effendi would half turn in his chair and study the drawing and point things out he wanted changed. A little higher here, a little thinner here, change to this, change that. And invariably, Shoghi Effendi's eye brought the building into more perfect proportion. There was no ambiguity in his mind. His idea was very, very clear. He knew exactly what he wanted the building to look like. And of course, in the end, this design was drawn by the hand of Charles Mason Remy, but it was actually Shoghi Effendi's design. Just like the superstructure of the Shrine of the Bab was designed by Sutherland Maxwell, but he really drew what was inside Shoghi Effendi's head. And so these are really designed by Shoghi Effendi, including this amazing feature. Unique is that beautiful sea foam green tiled roof. Absolutely beautiful. Oh, we're going to how they are found and the color and all of this is going to be one of the later parts of the chronology, but it's so exciting, so exciting. So this is our last section for today, is Shoghi Effendi's artistic sense. I decided to put it here because of his design of Bahji and his design of the temple on Mount Carmel and his design of the International Bahá'í Archives. I felt like this was the right place in the chronology, and these are stories that are going to span his whole life. So the first one is Shoghi Effendi, the artist. Shoghi Effendi had a really kind of truly extraordinary artistic sense. Of course, he was a sublime writer, so he was already an artist of the written word, but he had an artistic eye and an absolutely perfect sense of proportion, and what down to the millimeter, really. And why this is kind of exceptional is because Shoghi Effendi was born in Akka, one of the ugliest cities in the world imaginable, a former prison colony, so really, really profoundly ugly, with no beauty and no greenery. And added to that, when he was growing up, Shoghi Effendi had not come in contact with art, except, of course, probably calligraphy, but art, no. Painting, sculptures, columns, no. Probably until he went to Syrian Protestant college, and then probably he was exposed to some art when he was at Oxford University. William Sutherland Maxwell designed the Shrine of the Bab, but like I said, it was Shoghi Effendi's design that he implemented, drawing after drawing, detail after detail. And the Guardian, who had no training in gardening, was the one who designed all of the magnificent gardens in Haifa and Bahji, taking all the measurements himself with methods he invented himself. He, although having had no training in design, was the one who did all of the interior design for the International Bahá'í Archives, where he explained to Ruhiya Khanum exactly how it should be, but then he passed away before he could do it. But it was his design. Also, the interior design of the mansion of Bahji, that was all Shoghi Effendi, without the help of a single professional designer. Every photograph he placed himself. And his sense of proportions were just absolutely exact. He loved elegant, ornate, and beautifully proportioned ornaments and items. He loved the classical Greek style of architecture. He loved the Parthenon. He loved Gothic architecture. He loved the massive Signoria in Florence, a quintessential example of Italian Gothic and Renaissance architecture. And though all these styles were very different, he could bring all of these styles of architecture together in the superstructure of the Shrine of the Bab, and it would work. There are even elements of Islamic architecture in the Shrine of the Bab, and all of that works. Italian Renaissance, classic Greek, Gothic. I mean, it's amazing. Things that should not work, because Shoghi Effendi had such a brilliant artistic sense, they really did work. So I would give you an example. a perfect example of this is the International Bahá'í Archives. The exterior of the building is classical Greek. The inside, there are 2 balconies that are Renaissance style. The cabinets holding the relics are Japanese and Chinese. The 6 great chandelier are perfect European design. And there are also modern pieces of veneer design. Everything is from a different style, but somehow it all works together. Shoghi Effendi's. Oh, I just talked about this. Shoghi Effendi's perfect eye. Sometimes, when the Guardian was about to leave the house of Abdul Baha, he found Ruhiya Khanum, his wife, impatiently waiting for him to get into his car. Shoghi Effendi would say, "I know you want to clean the room, don't you?" "Yes," she would say, as soon as the Guardian was gone. Shoghi Effendi and one of the girl servants of the house would immediately run up to Shoghi Effendi's 2 rooms and clean them absolutely thoroughly. These were the only moments when they could clean because Shoghi Effendi was always working. So they would probably lift the paper and clean and put it back down. And they would make sure, first of all, they had a limited amount of time to clean. They had to do really, really fast because he wasn't always gone for very long. And the Guardian had a lot of things on his desk. He had a photograph of the interior of the Shrine of Baha'u'llah, a box with stationery, letters, 2 pen holders on either side of the desk. He had a blotting pad. He had beautiful little decorations. Of course, he had letters, had papers. And once the cleaning was done, they replaced, they really worked very, very hard to replace everything in exactly the place everything was at in the first place before they started cleaning. Or so they thought, because invariably when the Guardian returned, he would walk up to his desk, stand over it, and just with his fingertips, he would just rearrange almost imperceptibly the angle of all of his precious objects. A little twist here, a little push there. A millimeter's difference was obvious to him until everything was exactly the way that he wanted and the way he had left it before they had cleaned. Ruhiya Khanum described the experience of watching the Guardian imperceptibly and so gently rearrange his desk, and she said it was the most extraordinary thing, but it was so typical of him, this marvelous sense of order. And this is what I promised you earlier. This is how ideas came to Shoghi Effendi, and this is our last story for today. Shoghi Effendi's ideas and inspiration. Dawn, glimmerings, noonday sun. The Guardian had an organic pattern similar to the movement of the sun through the daytime sky. First it was dawn, first light. This is the very, very faint first outline of Shoghi Effendi's new idea. It's barely visible at this point, like the tentative outline of the sun rising out of darkness. A few words he might say here and there sort of sketch out the ideas of a new building project, a new garden, or a message to the Baha'i world. Second, there are glimmerings. Shoghi Effendi's goal begins to take shape, like the first rays of the sun when morning has risen. The Guardian's concept is more defined, it's clearer, it begins to take shape, and he concentrated his brilliant mind on it, so it's imbued with life. So that's the glimmerings. But third is the noonday sun. Once Shoghi Effendi had extracted the idea that had dawned, then discerned a viable, attainable goal in that idea, all of a sudden, in a blinding burst of light, like the noonday sun that we can't look at because it's so bright and it will blind us, an idea would emerge in full. An idea would birth in full from the Guardian in its complete and utter blinding splendor. It would become the 7-year plan, the 10-year crusade, the International Bahá'í Archives, redoing the gardens of Bahji, the superstructure of the Shrine of the Bab, the advent of divine justice. The promised day has come. That was how the Guardian had ideas, as described by Leroy, Ioas. I want to thank you all for today. I will see you next week for part 16 the superstructure of the Shrine of the Bab, which I've called the Queen of Carmel. Can't wait to see you then. Bye.